Before we begin, take a deep breath and let the noise of the day slowly fade. Unclench your jaw, soften your eyes, and let the weight of modern life melt away. Tonight, we're not chasing action or drama. We're wandering into the forgotten corridors of boring history, where medieval echoes linger and dark tales unfold like fading ink on parchment. Welcome to Midnight Sleepless, a resting place for tired minds, where the Middle Ages, ancient empires, and strange, dark history. Stories drift by like soft clouds. Here, knights, castles, and quiet empires return not with a roar, but with a whisper. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoyed these slow, sleepy journeys through medieval times, boring facts, and forgotten worlds. A gentle tap on the subscribe button helps keep this calm storytelling alive. Now, let the story begin. In the quiet corners of the Ottoman Empire's imperial stables, beneath the tiled domes and sandstone arches, there existed a world where silence reigned, not the silence of indifference, but one shaped by rhythm, patience, and practiced care. It was here, amid leather, twine, and old cloth, that the aging saddler Gupta Effendi passed his days, devoted to the gentle art of mending haynets and harness straps. The imperial stables in Istanbul were no ordinary workplace, home to the Sultan's prized horses, steeds bred for war, ceremony, and parades. The stables echoed with the sound of hoofbeats and the quiet labor of grooms, farriers, and caretakers. But Gupta Effendi's workshop, set apart in a shaded annex, felt like another world entirely, a world of soft creaks from wooden spools, the fragrance of oiled leather, and the rhythmic pull of a needle through thick strap hide. Jakob had served 3 sultans in his lifetime, not as a soldier or courtier, but as a humble mender of things others thought broken. His tools were few: curved needles forged by hand in Damascus, beeswax blocks for thread, scissors dulled at the edges by time, and a wooden awl with an ivory handle gifted by a janissary long past. With these, he stitched not just broken haynets or torn girths, but the continuity of tradition itself. Each morning, as the sun rose over the domes and minarets of the city, Jakob would be there, seated, cross-legged on a faded cushion, sorting through a stack of leather straps and frayed rope nets delivered by the youngest stable hands. These boys, barely in their teens, called him Deed or Usta, depending on whether they sought his wisdom or his scolding. He was both a grandfather and a master, wrapped in one weathered figure with eyes sharp as tacks. "You cannot rush a strap, child," he once said to young Marat, who had tried to fix a torn halter with kitchen twine. "A horse trusts its harness, as a soldier trusts his blade. One snap, and the trust is lost." Mora had nodded solemnly, watching as Jakob undid his messy knots and began again with calm fingers and a silent chant. An old rhyme from the steppes his father once whispered while braiding rope. His every movement held purpose. He wetted the leather just enough to soften it, oiled it gently with sesame oil, and worked the awl in careful rotations, never forcing the holes, but easing them open like coaxing secrets from a shy friend. His most treasured task was mending haynets, woven from coarse rope and prone to fraying. Haynets were humble, yet essential. Without them, the horses would scatter their feed, trampling it into the mud. Each net bore the marks of its usurer favorite knot, a widened loop, a tugged thread where a hungry mouth had worked too hard. And to Jakob, each tear was a story. "This one," he said one day, holding up a net with fraying knots near the bottom, "belongs to Iton, the gray stallion. See how he bites the corner when he's impatient?" He chuckled to himself, threading fresh rope with slow grace. He always gets his way. But not all mending was quiet work. One stormy morning, a guard burst into Jakob's workshop, cloak soaked, breath sharp, the Sultan's ceremonial harness. He gasped, The gold-threaded one knit, snapped at the buckle. We needed ready. By afternoon, for the procession, Jakob did not flinch. Wordlessly, he rose, took the harness from the man's hands, and unrolled it on his low workbench. The damage was subtle, yet dangerous. A weakened stitch in the chest strap, where weight bore down most fiercely during movement. He worked for hours, ignoring the thunder outside, his old fingers flying with an urgency that retained precision. He replaced the worn thread with doubled silk core sinew, reinforced the edges with a hidden braid, and burnished the surface until it gleamed. When the guard returned, Jakob held it out without a word. The man blinked. "It looks new." "Oh," Jakob said quietly. "It looks ready." Despite the prestige of his role, Jakob never sought honor or elevation. He declined offers to train apprentices formally at court. "Too much pride spoils the needle," he often said. "Let those who truly want to learn come with questions, not resumes." Still, many came. Boys from villages, sons of soldiers, even the occasional janissary, too wounded for the battlefield. They'd sit at his feet and listen, and if they proved patient, not merely skilled, but Reverend T would teach them a stitch or two. That was his way. Mending was a sacred act. He believed every object deserved a second chance. Once, a stable boy was about to discard a chew-through halter. "It's no good anymore," this boy muttered. "Why?" AKU beheld the broken piece in his hands, turning it gently. It held for 5 years, fed and led horses in snow and sun. We don't cast aside loyal service. And so he mended a knot to use again, to hang above his workshop door as a reminder. Even broken things have dignity in the long afternoons. As sunlight filtered through lattice windows and birds chirped in the fig trees outside, Jakob would hum autumn lullabies while he worked. Sometimes he'd tell tales from his youth of a time when he was a stable hand himself, brushing horses and dreaming of battles. But a fall from a horse had ended that path, and instead his hands found meaning not in swords or reins, but in needles and knots. As the years wore on, fewer came to see him work. The empire was changing. Machines now braided rope faster than human fingers, and foreign imports replaced handmade leather. Still, Jakob endured. There were always horses, and as long as they lived, they would need care, not just the rough utility of labor, but the subtle kindness of things repaired with love. One winter evening, the sky dark and snow beginning to fall, Jakob sat by the brazier, warming his fingers. A young man entered the workshop, quiet, with the look of a soldier. "You mended my saddle once," the man said softly. "Years ago, before I rode to Edorn, I never thanked you." Jakob looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. "If it carried you there and back, then we're even." The man placed a worn pouch on the tabula gift of rare beeswax and silk cord. For the next saddle, Jakob nodded, touched. He did not need thanks, but he cherished memory. Every strap he repaired, every net he reknotted, carried pieces of lives he'd never live, journeys he'd never take, and that too was enough. When Jakob Effendi passed away, quietly in his sleep one spring dawn, the entire stables mourned. The horses stamped uneasily for days, sensing the absence. The boys lit a candle outside his door, and the head groom, once a boy who had tugged on Jakob's sleeve, asking how to tie his soldier's knot, placed the old halter above the entrance of the imperial tack room. A plaque was carved in old Turkish script and mounted beside it. In every thread, a memory. In every mend, a mercy. Jacobi, who gave broken things new life, can still, to this day, when the wind brushes through the stables and rustles the leather straps and nets hanging from wooden beams, some say they can hear a soft humming them, lullaby of a man who believed that to mend was to love, and that even the humblest repair could honor the soul of a creature who bore the burdens of an empire. In the pre-dawn hush of an Edo period winter, when frost clung to bamboo stalks and even the crows refused to stir, a different kind of warrior began his daily battle. These were not samurai with flashing blades or armored riders on horseback, but the silent, tireless servants who ensured that every lord could rise with dignity into the light of day. Among them was Cato, a young Jenkinband gatekeeper's apprentice, whose life revolved around duties finished before the first rooster crowed, before midnight chill fled from the sky. Cato rose quietly from his straw mat. The servant quarters were cramped and cold. A thin paper lantern flickered near the doorway. He slipped into his brown hemp kimono and tied his korsobi tightly around his waist. His breath puffing pale in the darkness stopped behind him. Other servants stirred. Me, the laundress, Dezo, the cook's assistant, Haru, a stable boy. Each carried a sense of purpose as strong as any samurai's code. They shared its secret pride. If the household ran smoothly, it meant no one would ever notice they existed. That invisibility was their silent victory, the daimyo they served. Lord Takahiro was a mid-ranking samurai who lived in a sprawling wooden manor near Edo City. The household slept behind heavy cedar doors and latticed shoji screens, oblivious to the choreography taking place around them every dawn. Kito's first task was to light the lanterns hanging along the outer wall of the manor with flint and steel. He coaxed a slender flame, shielding it carefully in his palms. The edges of his sleeves darkened from soot as he slipped from post to post. Each lantern must be glowing just as morning came, symbolizing honor and vigilance. Should any be left dark when officers of the shogun's patrol passed by, it could be considered a sign of laziness or even disrespect to the Tokugawa peace. Behind the stables, Haru bundled straw for the horses and rubbed their coats to warmth. The war horses no longer marched to battle, yet they remained symbols of strength and readiness. Haru whispered soft apologies as he slipped icy bits into their buckets. He knew each horse's nature. One kicked when startled, another loved having his muzzle brushed. Mist formed around their nostrils as they chewed. Their hooves struck the ground like low drums, the hidden heartbeat of samurai power, while outside was Kaito's realm. Deep in the manor's kitchens reigned Okuma-sen, the fearsome head cook. Every servant respected. Even samurai wives were careful around her. Dezo crouched beside her, soaking rice in wooden tubs and chopping daikon radish with a blade sharp enough to shave a man's life away. The kitchen fire was a sacred thing. It must be alive when Lord Takahiro stirred. Breakfast was a matter of timing. Miso broth must steam, but not boil. Pickled plums must lie precisely 3 across the tray like soldiers in formation. As the rice crackled gently in its pot, Kami-sen muttered her morning command. Perfection without praise. Dezo bowed, knowing to obey, even in silence. Elsewhere, Amin knelt before a basin, wringing out silk sleeves in icy water. Each night she gathered the Lord's clothes, every speck of dust shaken out and each stain scrubbed away with salted rice bran. Samurai clothing was not just a garment, it was reputation stitched into fabric. If a lord appeared before fellow warriors with rumpled hakama or dirt-speckled sleeves, it invited whispering voices that might cut deeper than steel amis. Hands were cracked and swollen, but she loved her work. Let his robes flutter like banners, she often whispered, while hanging them by charcoal braziers to dry. As steam rose from the robes, the faint scent of white camellia lingering in the cloth, one would never guess the pain behind such grace. By the time Cato had finished lighting every lantern, dawn's first gray had begun to bloom. He tightened his tabi socks and hurried toward the outer gate. Beneath frosted eaves, he swept fallen leaves, not once, but 3 times, making sure no footprint, no fragment betrayed disorder. The official inspector from the city could ride by without warning, and should his keen eye spot a loose tile or sagging gate hinge, Punishment could fall not only upon the servants, but upon Lord Takahiro himself, even without external threats. The code of the household demanded readiness. Along the Nagaya, a long communal corridor, Yuriki, a retired samurai acting as chief steward, moved silent as a shadow. His one eye carried the weight of old battlefield scars. Though mercy had spared his life, duty never released its grip. He inspected each servant without speaking, judging posture, speed, precision. His approval came in a brief nod. His disapproval in a long stare that could make even a veteran tremble. "Kato," he whispered suddenly. Kato halted, mid-sweep. "The north lantern wicks are too low," Yuriki said, voice soft as snow but sharp as frostbite. "Raise them. Serve samurai, not merchants." Kato bowed so low that his forehead almost touched the ground. "Hi, Yuriki-sama." Number. Argument. No excuse. To serve meant to anticipate, not merely respond. Without delay, he rushed back, readjusting the lanterns. His fingers burned from the cold and from shame. Still, he repeated it until each wick burned with samurai dignity, back inside the manor itself. Quiet footfalls prepared the inner chambers. The futon where Lord Takahiro slept must be aired unseen. The tatami mats must be wiped with damp cloths, scented faintly with cedar oil. The inner garden paths were raked in delicate patterns of swirls and lines, a meditation of stone and sand. If even a single leaf fell across the gravel in the moment Lord Takahiro strolled by for morning tea, it would appear disrespectful to nature's harmony. When everything neared completion, the household fell into a strange, thrilling stillness. It was the pause of a perfectly drawn bowstring just before release, when mastery couldn't be seen, only felt. The sky turned pale, rose, and the rooster crowed. Somewhere, a temple bell rang. Yo, Riki, passed the order in his ghost-like voice. Lord awakens. Feet patted urgently, yet soundlessly. Kato slipped into his position by the gate, the final guardian of silence. Me vanished behind a screen, ready should the Lord need fresh robes. Deizo and Okamisan laid the morning tray with ceremonial care. It was then the sliding door of Lord Takahiro's chamber eased open. Without seeing them, he trusted in their work, a trust afforded only through years of unseen perfection. I stepped out, dressed not in armor, but elegant Hidatari robes. His hair shone with camellia oil. His posture was as unyielding as a sword layered with 100 folds. He breathed the crisp morning air, free of soot, of rot, of chaos, and nodded as though to the world itself. And though he did not bow to them, it was as if each servant received a drop of honor, trickling from that single nod. Had they failed, his anger might have shaken walls. Had they succeeded, his gratitude was maintained through this precious absence of scolding. In samurai households, silence was the highest praise. Morning meal proceeded with wheel-oiled precision, as Lord Takahiro's strong fingers lifted the first lacquered bowl. Kami-san's back straightened even where she hid near the kitchen doorway. When he did not frown at the pickles, nor hesitate over the rice's firmness, Deizo exhaled a breath he didn't know he held. Afterward, Lord Takahiro took his katana from a silent wooden stand and prepared to depart for the castle. The sandals, laid out by Kato, fit his feet without adjustment. Haru led forth the horse, whose coat gleamed like blackened lacquer. The mount's harness showed no wear, no rusted buckle. It fit like honor itself across steely muscle. Lord Takahiro rode out through the gates, passing Kato. He did not look down, yet his passing confirmed their invisible victory. His hooves clattered against frosted earth, fading under sun. The servants stayed bowed until even dust had settled. Only then did they straighten. For a moment, they all exchanged the slightest smiles. Their war was won for today, but their battles were not finished. Soon there would be midday tasks, arranging guests, tatami, polishing armor stands, embroidering family crests onto ceremonial banners. At night, there would be ashes to sweep, bedding to fold, blades to store. Still, each knew there was a quiet magic in being unseen. Kaito once asked Okami-san, "Why do we try so hard if no one thanks us?" She traced a wrinkle on her weathered cheek. Because tradition is built on people like us. Without hidden hands, even the greatest samurai cannot stand tall. Kaito lay again upon his straw mat, weary but proud. Tomorrow, before the sky's edge stirred with dawn, he would rise again, relight the lanterns, sweep the path, polish gate, prepare rations, feed steeds, can ensure that when Lord Takahiro stepped into daybreak, he would do so, bathed in seamless perfection in the stories told by wandering poets and theater troupes. They would sing of samurai bravery, of blood-bright armor and cleaving steel, but none would ever recite poems of those unseen souls who, before sunrise, waged their own gentle wars against time, error, and disorder. And yet, perhaps, it did not matter, because, in their own hearts, they carried a secret truth in every silent task of mourning. Petals of honor bloomed quietly, unseen yet eternal in their devotion. In the hush of dawn, before the clang of steel and the thunder of hooves reverberated through castle walls, a quieter world stirred to life, one that few history books mention, though it played its own role in the grand theater of samurai prestige. It was the hidden world of fabric and fragrance, of wooden tubs and lavender steam, of laundresses and robe masters whose fingertips were stained by soaps made of ash and plum oil. They were the secret artisans behind the immaculate creases on a samurai's robe and the subtle musk of sandalwood that floated wherever a noble warrior walked. These were the keepers of a forgotten art. Oh, the weavers of scented shadows, the caretakers of samurai laundry. Inside the laundry courtyard of Lord Hidemasa's estate in Edo, a young girl named Aiko knelt beside a steaming wooden vat. Swirls of vapor rose like pale ghosts into the crisp morning air. She dipped strips of silk pale blue, broidered with chrysanthemum petals, to the boiling mixture of soap root, salt, and cloves. Her hands were quick but gentle. Any small tear or uneven fold would not escape the sharp eye of Lady Omori. The mistress of the laundry chamber, Aiko, had been orphaned during one of the clan skirmishes in the northern provinces. She remembered little of her mother's embrace, or father's laugh only, the scent of freshly washed linen, and the hum of wind chimes outside a modest home. At the age of 13, she had been sent south to Edo, earning her keep in Lord Hidemasa's grand estate. The warriors above practiced the art of death. She and the others below mastered the art of preservation, of silk, cotton, and honor. Within these stone walls, a samurai's robe was more than cloth, it was reputation. Many samurai commissioned robes from Kyoto's finest looms, layers of indigo-dyed silk, broidered brocade depicting cranes, waves, dragons. Their armor would hide much of their robes during battle, but in courts and tea houses, the elegance of one's garment communicated silent messages: loyalty, taste, sophistication, power. Every pleat and fragrance carried purpose. And so the laundresses had become guardians of social secrets. Do not merely wash, Lady Omori often said, her voice sharp like a thread pulled too tight. Cleanse with memory, fold with truth, perfume with intention. Around the courtyard, other girls bustled with vigorous skill. Some pounded heavy cotton hakama on stones, following a rhythmic beat that echoed the cadence of taiko drums. Others mixed botanical perfumes in bronze bowls of sandalwood chips crushed with cedar leaves, plum blossoms mashed with rice paste, droplets of lemon peel squeezed into water. These were brushed carefully onto inner layers of kimonos, designed not to overwhelm, but to whisper a passing trail of scent that lingered like a rumor. Icio's favorite part of the process was the kagiori, the folding of shadows. A robe was pressed and creased in precise angles so that the cloth captured shadows along its folds, appearing darker where light could not reach. Samurai believed that shadows on fabric represented depth of soul. A man must possess both dignity in the light and strength in the shadows. Folding shadows required silence and concentration. Not everyone was granted that task. Only those whom Lady Omori trusted most. 3 years passed, and the quiet courtyard became more familiar to Aiko than her own childhood home. By 16, she had mastered the art of kettle-boiling silk, removing bloodstains with persimmon tannin, lightning stiff cotton with egg yolk. Her fingers had memorized fabric, just as the swordsman above memorized stances. One chilly autumn morning, a new order arrived as special request from Lord Hidemasa himself. He was to visit the shogun's castle and needed a set of robes unlike any seen before. The autumn assembly would include the most powerful lords, and each garment would be scrutinized as if it were a weapon. The task was handed to Lady Omori, but executed by Aiko. The robe itself was a marvel, black silk so deep that it swallowed light, broidered with muted gray cranes in flight. Along the hem, faint lines of silver threading depicted waves on a dark sea. Lady Omori commanded Aiko to prepare the robe for kagiori, folding it in such a way that made each crane appear as if emerging from shadow. For 3 nights, Aiko barely slept. She worked in lamplight, adjusting the robe's folds so the shadows formed precise angles. It's too steep a fold, and the silk would crease permanently. Too shallow, and the effect would vanish in daylight. For fragrance, she chose to layer 3 scents, the sharpness of pine needles to symbolize resilience, the warmth of red tea to evoke hospitality, and the faintest drop of burnt orange peel for courage. Each scent was subtle, nearly imperceptible. The true artistry lay in restraint. At dawn on the 4th day, Lady Omori inspected the work. She said nothing for a long time, her fingers gliding across the robe as if reading a secret message. Then, with a nod, she whispered, "You have folded shadows, as if they are alive." It was the highest compliment a laundress could receive. The robe was delivered to Lord Hidemasa, who wore it to the shogun's autumn assembly. Though many wore garments of blazing colors, vermilion reds, emerald greens, radiant golds, was Lord Hidemasa's dark, shadowed robe that stirred the most talk. Samurai whispered of depth, sophistication, and an aura of silent power. When Lord Hidemasa passed, the faint scent of pine and orange peel lingered, stirring memory on the wind. Few could point to the source, but all remembered it. Yet, glory in the samurai world was often fleeting. A political scandal soon erupted. Lord Hidemasa was accused by rival lords of disloyal whispers. He was dismissed from court, stripped of favor, and though he was not forced to commit seppuku, his prestige collapsed. With his fall came changes within the estate. Budgets were tightened, servants were let go, so once busy laundry courtyard grew quiet, like a pond emptied of koi. Lady Omori was sent away to a distant manor. Aiko, now 17, was told she would be reassigned to become a handmaiden in a merchant's household, or married off to a farmer. But Lord Hidemasa's wife, Lady Mitsuko, known for her discerning eyes and sharper memory, summoned Aiko privately. "The robe you prepared gave my husband dignity in his final moment of influence," she said. "Such skills should not be forgotten." She gifted Aiko a small lacquer box containing fine needles, rare soap fragments, handwritten recipes of scents, and a small brush for folding shadows. "Go south to Kyoto," the lady said. "Seek the house of Osoni, robe makers to the imperial family. Show them what you know. Offer them the art of folding shadows." And so, carrying only her linen bundle and the lacquer box, Aiko left Edo. The road to Kyoto was long and uncertain, filled with bandit rumors and cold nights. But traveler stories often brought her comfort, especially words of soldiers who spoke of strange power in robes, scented like memory. Upon reaching Kyoto, she stood before the house of Ausonia's gates tall, its silks famous across the empire. She requested an audience. At first, the gatekeepers laughed, laundress seeking favor among robe artists. But she remained unmoved. When finally granted a small test, she was given a simple, pale robe. Instead of dyeing it with rich color, she worked with light and shadow, combing in gentle folds that cast depths across the silk. For fragrance, she used bamboo ash and white lily root blended with rainwater when presented. The robe appeared like a moon hidden behind drifting cloud. The master robe maker murmured, eyes wide, "I have never seen cloth reflect silence before." Go was offered a place among them not as a servant, but as an apprentice robe artist. Over the years, her reputation grew. Nobles began to whisper of a mysterious woman who could fold shadows like whispers, who scented robes with stories. They brought silks from far places just for her touch. Some said her robes carried good fortune in battle. Others believed they deepened the wearer's presence in court. Yet to all who asked, Aiko simply said, "I learned from forgotten women in a hidden courtyard. We served not the sword, but the soul." Time advanced, armies rose and fell, castles burned, alliances shifted. Samurai culture began to fade as the modern age crept across Japan. Yet, in antique shops of Kyoto, one could sometimes find an old robe folded in a shape that seemed to drink shadow, emanating a faint scent of pine, tea, and orange peel. Historians puzzled over them. Many dismissed them as curiosities, but those sensitive to whispers of history know better. They know that behind the glory of samurai helmets and shining armors stood unsung artisans, humble laundresses like Aiko, who worked in steam and silence. Their craft was invisible, yet as essential as a blade's edge. In the art of samurai laundry, there existed not merely cleanliness, but transformation, the turning of fabric into legend. And if you stand in the misty streets of old Kyoto at dawn, you might still catch the faintest sensible lingering of a robe that once carried shadows. And hear the echo of women's laughter where steam once gathered, weaving their forgotten art into the fabric of memory, one fold at a time. The first light of dawn crept gently across the paper shoji screens of the Nakamura household, touching them with a pale blush. Outside, the early summer mist hovered over the stone paths and perfectly raked gravel like a ghostly veil, softening the world in shades of silver. Within, everything remained still, stillness not of sleep, but of discipline. Tadashi Nakamura, at 62 Springs, had long retired from active service under Lord Hita Sawanaji. Yet, even with age, stooping his back and silver threads lacing his once dark knot of hair, the ritual lived on for a samurai. Retirement did not mean rest. It meant quiet devotion to the heart of his lifelong code. He rose not with the rooster's cry, but just before it, his internal clock sharpened through decades of habit and duty. His kimono, folded the night before with care, rustled softly as he slipped it on. In the next room, his grandson Haru still slept soundly, the boy only 13, yet already taller than Tadashi had been at that age, with limbs fast becoming those of a young man. For now, Haru was training with the bakan, the wooden practice, sword, and reading the Budo Shoshinshu, absorbing the philosophy behind the blade. But soon, very soon, Tadashi would pass down to him more than texts and stanzas. And so, today's ritual held deeper importance. Tadashi stepped silently across the tatami flooring, each movement precise, each breath deeply controlled. To disturb the silence with clumsy sound would be to dishonor the sword. He eased open a cedarwood chest and withdrew a long, cloth-wrapped bundle, his katana and wakizashi, his soul, paired and eternal. He carried them to the inner courtyard, where a low wooden stand awaited. There, sitting upon a cushion, was everything he needed: a tray with powdered uchiko stone, square of nugigami paper, choji oil, faintly scented of clove, a delicate oiling paper, and 2 pieces of soft silk. Instruments humble in appearance, yet sacred in use. He placed the bundle carefully on the stand and slowly unwrapped it. As his fingers removed the final layer of navy blue silk, the morning sunlight caught the steel and sent a gleam rippling down the blade's curve. Katashi bowed his head. The katana, named Kagihiro, meaning shadow's radiance, had been forged 2 centuries earlier by a swordsmith of legendary reputation. Its hamen, the temper line, flashed like a slow-burning flame along the edge. The sword had clashed in real battles. It had tasted blood. To honor such history required one thing above all: silence. From the left, the kitchen door slid open with a soft wooden click. His daughter-in-law I.M. knelt, placing a small lacquered tray with rice, porridge, and tea beside him. She bowed and retreated without a word. All understood, during morning sword maintenance, voices must rest. Tadashi, first, removed the makugi peg from the hilt using a small wooden punch, freeing the suka. Gently, he lifted the bare blade and laid it across the cleaning cloth. He examined it with narrow eyes, seeing, not just with sight, but with memory, every notch of a duel, every polish given by masters long gone. No rust had dared show itself. He did not allow it. With a tap, he dusted uchiko powder onto the blade's flat surface, then stroked it lightly with the silk, drawing out old oil and grime in graceful arcs. Uchiko, powdered stone wrapped in silk, had a fine, almost ethereal pat. He made each movement count, not mechanical, but mindful. Next came the wiping with nugigami thick Japanese paper. He folded it once, twice, and pressed down the edge. Steel's length, steady hands, guiding. The blade grew brighter with each stroke, as if waking from sleep. The silence deepened. Even the sparrows seemed too quiet their chirping as Tadashi attended to the blade's spirit. His mind wandered not. For here, thoughts of politics, of clan rivalry, of taxes, of harvest, had no role. Ritual sword care was meditation, the merging of steel, soul, and silence. He lifted the choji-infused oil carefully with the oiling paper. The faint clove scent blossomed around him. With long sweeps from spine to edge, he coated the blade in a thin, glimmering sheen, not thick enough to pull, but just enough to shield steel from time. Oil, the guardian; cloth, the mediator; the sword, eternal. He reattached the hilt, securing the makugi back into place with a gratifying snap. Then, gently, he tested the grip, feeling the familiar weight. He sheathed Kagihiro softly with a breath of gratitude. Then came the wakizashi sugijij, moon's shadow, shorter, but no less precious. Some men die with only the small blade left to them that served his father during night watches in castle halls. The ritual repeated. Tadashi's fingers, though worn by decades, never trembled. A shift of cloth, a whisper of silk. The pool of morning light rose, filling the courtyard with gold. The scent of oil, tatami, and summer filled the air. As Tadashi finished, Haru's door slid open. The boy stepped out, rubbing sleep from his eyes, but at once bowed upon seeing his grandfather seated with the swords. Instantly, his back straightened. "Ohayo gozaimasu, grandfather," he whispered. Tadashi said nothing. Speech would break what the ritual still held. Instead, he beckoned Haru with a tilt of his chin. The boy knelt properly beside him. "This is the heart of the warrior," Tadashi said, quietly at last, voice barely above a breath. "Not in killing, but in caring. Without this ritual, the blade becomes rust, and the samurai becomes hollow." Haru watched, wide-eyed, as Tadashi carefully rewrapped the swords in silk, folding corners perfectly, tying the cord in a simple but strong knot. The elegance of it struck the boy deeply. To hold a sword was one thing, to care for it was another world, one rooted in diligence, grace, and stillness. Tadashi gestured for Haru to take the wakizashi's bundle. "Carry this," he said. "Feel its weight when it rests, not just when it strikes." As they walked back through the quiet house, Ayam reappeared, readying breakfast for the family. She watched fondly as the pair entered the ancestral room. There, before the Kamadana shrine and family scrolls, Tadashi placed the katana again inside its chest. Haru knelt and placed the wakizashi beside it. Together, they bowed deeply. Later that day, Katashi found Haru in the garden, standing behind a line of training posts. With bakken in hand, the boy practiced forms: rising, cut, diagonal sweep, thrust, his brow furrowed, not from exhaustion, but contemplation. Tadashi approached, his arms folded. "The sword is not moved by strength," he said. "It is moved by preparation. When you maintain it without fail, your heart grows sharp. When your heart is sharp, your cut will follow." Haru bowed. "I understand." That evening, as shadows deepened and cicadas cried, Tadashi sat once more in his study, took out a small, weathered notebook, his sword maintenance diary. Each entry, going back 40 years, bore date, weather, signs of wear, and notes of ritual. Today, he wrote, "Early summer mist, Kagi hero bright, a trace of old oil removed. Ritual performed with grandson observing. He is nearly ready." He paused, brushing his fingertip over the kanji for Haru's name. The future would come, whether or not one was prepared. But there were ways to prepare the soul, and caring for the blade was among the highest. In the days that followed, Haru joined Tadashi at dawn without being called. Together, they laid out the tools. Together, they wiped the blades. Tadashi watched carefully as Haru brushed Uchiko powder across the steel. Strokes were uneven, too quick at first, but as the mornings went by, Tadashi observed the shift. The boy's breathing slowed. His hands found rhythm. His eyes saw not just steel, but life reflected in it. Finally, one morning, Tadashi handed Haru the katana fully, not to clean, but to hold unsheathed. "The first polish begins in the heart," Tadashi said. "Close your eyes. Listen." Haru obeyed. Standing barefoot on the tatami, he cradled the naked blade in both palms. Eyes shut, he listened, not to birds or breeze, but to the weight of responsibility singing through the metal. Silence, deep and resounding, filled him. When at last he opened his eyes, Tadashi saw a new awareness blooming in the boy. Pride warmed the old samurai's chest, though he kept his face stern. "Tomorrow," Tadashi said, "you will perform the ritual without me guiding your hands." Haru hesitated, then bowed so low his forehead touched the mat. "Yes, grandfather." That night, Tadashi slept lighter than usual, heart full of strange emotions, joy, and a melancholy only the aging know. His father had done the same for him in a courtyard long since gone. And someday, Haru would pass this ritual onward, perhaps to a son or student, in a world already changing beyond castles and swords. At dawn, Tadashi let Haru rise first. From another room, he listened to the sounds of ritual unfolding, the delicate clink of the blade against cloth, up, gentle sprinkle of Uchiko, silence, long, perfect, key, no drop tools, no hasty movements. Tadashi smiled into his sleeve. A single tear grew in his eye, not of sorrow, but of fulfillment. When the ritual finished, Haru approached, kneeling at his side. "Grandfather," he began, but Tadashi raised his hand. "Today, you speak only with your practice." Haru nodded, his silent smile shining brighter than steel. And so, the ritual lived on, not loud, not grand, but woven into quiet mornings, rustling silk, and the gleam of maintained swords. In that silence, generation after generation discovered the truest truth of the samurai's path, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the diligent care that readies the soul, like steel polished in silence, for whatever may come. The lamplight flickered in the stone corridor, sending long, quivering shadows skittering across the worn tatami mats. Beyond the grandeur of the Lord's chambers, and past the lacquered screens, painted with cranes and plum blossoms, lay a world, rarely spoken of, a world of hushed footsteps, bowed heads, and uncelebrated breaths. Hidden behind sliding walls and cramped attic crawl spaces lived the silent machinery that kept the noble households of feudal Japan immaculate. Their names were seldom remembered, yet their hands touched every corner of the estate. These were the lives that existed beneath the tatami. Within the Fujimori clan estate of Kyoto, countless servants moved like spirits, their presence felt only in the absence of disorder. Aya was one such shadow. At 16, she had already learned to thread herself through rooms like a ribbon of smoke. She slept with 11 other maidservants in a narrow space between the outer wall and the Lord's private library, a room no larger than a walk-in cupboard. Their mats were stacked during the day and rolled out again at night. They called it the cave no naka, inside the wall. By dawn's first whisper, Aya and the others were awake, often after barely 3 hours of sleep. Their first duty was to prepare the charcoal fires in the kitchen hearth. The cook, a heavy-set woman named Otomi, expected steaming kettles before the Lord and his family stirred. Aya's fingers were always raw from gathering kindling, but she never spoke of pain. Pain was merely another shade of silence, as the cooks began simmering rice and miso broth. Aya moved to the storehouse behind the estate, where barrels of soy sauce, pickled daikon, and fermented plums were kept. She checked the inventory while her stomach growled. The servants' meals were meager, a scoop of millet, perhaps a few pickles, and eaten while standing. There was never time to sit inside the main halls. The Lord and his noble guests walked upon gleaming floors and ornate tatami flooring. It was Aya's task to keep those mats spotless. She brushed each one with soft straw brooms until they shone. On her knees, she bowed over and over, scrubbing away every sign of dust. She thought of her mother, sometimes a seamstress in a distant, rural village who had sent Aya into service so the family might afford rice. That was 4 years ago. Aya's memories of home had faded like old ink. All she knew now were these corridors, these rules, and the eternal expectation of perfection. The estate bustled during the day with retainers, merchants, poets, and priests. Aya learned to predict their needs before they voiced them. Okay, dry towel here, warm sake there, slippers aligned at just the right angle. Hands existed to ensure others never lacked a comfort. Yet, behind the screens, cracks appeared, whispers. Between maids carried private sorrows, who had blisters. His family had succumbed to famine, who cried into their sleeves at night when all else slept. Come evening, through sweeping the garden paths of fallen pine needles and arranging the lanterns along the veranda, Aya retreated once more to the narrow sleeping chamber behind the wall. Kia was still there, heavy with the exhalations of cramped bodies. Some girls snored from exhaustion, others trembled silent tears. Aya often lay awake, staring at the thin wooden beams above her head. She could hear the Lord's daughters laughing in the room, beyond their voices light as wind chimes, as a music teacher plucked at the shamisen for their entertainment. Beneath that laughter, Aya counted her breath and willed her fatigue to be enough to drown thought. Not all servants endured quietly. Karo, a young footman who polished the family's ornate sandals and lacquered boxes, once spoke of running away to become a ronin, a masterless drifter. At 17, he was restless with resentment. "We burn ourselves so they may shine," he muttered once to Aya while they scrubbed the stone steps. She merely nodded, too cautious to speak agreement. To voice discontent was to invite punishment. A reduction in rations, a beating from the overseer, or a dismissal without wage. Yet the thought lingered in her heart. What if there was life beyond these walls? Seasons cycled. In spring, Aya rose before the cherry blossoms unfolded. She pressed the petals that drifted indoors back outside with care, lest footprints spoil their beauty. In summer, the heat made the corridors swelter, and she fanned infants belonging to noble visitors until her arms ached. In autumn, she raked crimson leaves until her back cracked. And in winter, her hands bled as she fetched snow-melted water to wash laundry. Through all these changes, one thing remained constant. Aya had no name to the household. She was simply that girl behind the wall. Despite the hardship, moments of quiet grace existed. On certain nights, when the moon was particularly bright, Aya and her fellow maid Yuki would sneak into the veranda and gaze at the garden pond. Reflections of silver light trembled on the surface as carp glided beneath. Yuki would whisper dreams of one day marrying a farmer and tending a field of her own. Aya never dared voice her own wishes, which lived too deeply buried for words. But beneath her ribs, a faint flutter insisted. Life could be more than this cycle of unseen service. Years passed. Aya's shoulders grew stronger, her posture steadier. She served tea to foreign envoys with a steady hand. She stitched silk kimonos for the lord's wife with perfect seams. She learned to read people's moods by the curve of their eyebrows. The overseer came to trust her, even relied on her to discipline younger maids. She became a pillar within the invisible world behind the walls, the one others leaned on. Her own needs remained unspoken. Then, one autumn, news swept the estate. The Fujimori clan was falling from favor. Their patronage at court had waned. Lavish expenditures were to be cut. Servants would be dismissed. Aya, now 20, barely reacted as the overseer gave them the news. Each girl was called one by one, given a coin or two of farewell, and told to depart before dawn. Beneath the tatami, Kaya gathered her few possessions: a comb, a chipped teacup, a bundle of neatly folded rags. She looked around the cramped chamber where she had slept for so many years. The walls, once oppressive, now looked oddly familiar, almost like ribs of a great beast that had sheltered her. Outside, the wind rustled the garden's bamboo leaves. At the gate, she paused. Other servants, too, were stepping onto the road, bewildered and silent. Where would they go now? What did life hold for those who had known nothing but obedience? Aya took her first steps beyond the estate walls, just as dawn painted the eastern sky pink. She felt neither joy nor sorrow, only a strange, aching space inside her chest. The world beyond smelled of wet soil, wood smoke, and possibilities. For years, she had belonged to the unseen world, her existence erased beneath tatami. But now, perhaps, her footsteps might create a trace of their own. She did not know where the road would lead her, perhaps to a temple seeking a washerwoman, or a merchant needing a clerk, or even back to her mother's distant village. But with each step, she told herself a quiet truth. She had survived. She had served with dignity, even when no one spoke her name. Now, as the sun rose, she whispered her name into the breeze, just to remind herself that she still had one. Somewhere behind her, inside the grand estate, nobles would still tread softly across flawless mats and admire painted screens. But the ones who had made that beauty possible, Aya, Yuki, Taro, and countless others, had scattered like petals on a river. Their stories would fade from memory, lost to history's grand narratives. Yet their lives, though forgotten, had been real and full, shaped not only by hardship, but by resilience, quiet loyalty, and the tiniest seeds of hope. These were the hidden lives, the invisible pillars, the souls who slept behind the walls. And though their backs bent beneath the weight of expectations, their spirits, no matter how weary, carried within them a simple wish to someday be seen. In the grand wooden corridors of Edo period Japan, where lacquered floors reflected candlelight and sliding SGG screens muted the sounds of the outside world, there existed a silent class of individuals whose presence was rarely recorded in scrolls or praised in poetry. These were the kitchen servants of the samurai, whose lives unfolded not on bloody battlefields or in ornate reception halls, but in smoke-filled hearth rooms and dark, clay-walled storerooms. Their world was measured not in sword strikes or heroic tales, but in grains of rice, simmering broths, and the comforting clatter of wooden bowls. Shino was one such servant, barely 18, with nimble fingers, quiet eyes, and a back used to bowing. She had come from a distant fishing village to work in the household of Lord Hayashi, a stern middle-rank samurai residing near the center of the city. Each morning, before the temple bell tolled, she stepped softly across frost-tipped stones into the kitchen courtyard, breath clouding in front of her face as she drew water from the deep stone well. The air smelled of cedar logs, dried kombu, and faint soy smoke, even before the lords and ladies stretched their limbs beneath silk coverings. Shino and her fellow servants began their invisible symphony of tasks, their meals, the simple nourishment that kept their strength alive, were far different from the feasts presented to the samurai families they served. While their masters ate bright, pickled plums, sweet egg omelets, and grilled river fish, the servants' bowls were filled with humble offerings. Thin rice gruel, called oke, barley mixed with rice, called muji gohan, miso soup brewed from leftover vegetable greens, and salted radish, kimchi barely pink with pepper. And yet, each bowl held history, tenderness, and even a sort of reverence. Shino's hands were usually busy washing grains 30 times until the water ran clear, inspecting dried anchovies for worms, slicing dakan into fans and half moons. But it was the making of miso soup that carried within it the heart of their daily survival. At dawn, she lit the fire beneath a heavy iron pot, gently adding dried kelp strips and letting the water warm. When steam began to rise with tiny bubbles, she dipped a wide bamboo ladle into a barrel of deep chestnut-brown miso paste. She dissolved it slowly, stirring with practiced patience until the broth thickened and the air filled with that unmistakably earthy aroma, fermented, grounding, warm as a mother's lap. Key into this space went neglected vegetables, the twisted ends of carrots, bruised yam leaves, even turnip stems. Whatever was left after the Lord's meals became treasure in Shino's pot. Seated on wooden stools and worn straw mats, Shino and 3 other women succoed, thin as a reed, Masa, whose laughter was round as her cheeks, and old Kinu, whose wrinkled hands trembled slightly from years of work, would eat their breakfast in silence. Bowls cradled in chilled fingers, they slurped the miso soup with hushed gratitude. It was not rich, it was not splendid, but it was hot, filling, and familiar. Every mouthful tasted of shared burden and shared comfort. As winter deepened, their rations went thinner still. Rice became scarcer, replaced more often with millet or soba remnants. Some nights, Shino dreamed only of a solitary white grain between her lips, sweet, soft, glorious. Yet she made sure the samurai kitchens never failed in their duties. A tea. When a messenger arrived with news of guests, Shino helped pound fresh rice into snowy mochi cakes, laying them with red bean paste or sprinkling them with sugar luxuries forbidden to servants. She arranged pickled umeboshi into delicate spirals for serving trays, knowing well she would only lick their salty brine from her fingers later. Unseen. Still, even servants had tiny celebrations. On new moon nights, after the household had quieted, Shino and Masa smuggled small parcels of roasted chestnuts into the charcoal room. There, under the faint glow of embers, they cracked them open, savoring the soft, buttery flesh inside. told stories of their home's masa had once danced 4 fishermen on festival days. Shino remembered her mother's thin voice singing lullabies while mending fishing nets. With each chestnut bite, their eyes shimmered, not just from heat, but from nostalgia and bravery. When spring arrived, a miracle of plenty unfolded. The kitchen gardens brushed green again young spinach, bamboo shoots tender enough to bite with a smile, and fuki shoots lined with dew. During these months, Shino prepared wild herb rice using sansai she herself gathered at the forest edge, fiddlehead ferns, angelica shoots, and horsetail stems. She seasoned them in light soy, tossing them with rice and a hint of ginger. Though still simple, these bowls tasted bursting with life green, fresh, hopeful. Eating them while sitting on sun-warmed stones, Shino felt almost noble. There was another secret gift the servants shared: nukazuke pickles, fermented in rice bran. In a wooden barrel tucked behind the outer shed, they buried cucumber ends, carrot nubs, and tiny eggplants sent down from the main kitchen. Each day, before dawn, Shino plunged her hand into the moist bread, turning it and burying fresh scraps. After a few sunsets, they retrieved crisp, tangy pickles sour with lacto-fermentation, crunchy between their teeth. Often, these pickles were eaten with nothing but a bowl of hot water, salted lightly. The pickles themselves became the feast. Sometimes, after a tiring day of chopping firewood and scrubbing pots, Shino bit into a pickle so sharply sour it made her eyes water, and yet she whispered, "Delicious," as though it were the finest delicacy. One sweltering summer afternoon, a young page named Terenasuke's son of the house steward watched Shino prepare her miso soup and asked her, curiously, "Is it not tiresome to eat the same soup every day?" Shino, wiping sweat from her brow, simply bowed. "Every bowl is different," she answered softly. "One day saltier, one day sweeter. Some days it has happiness, some days only warmth. But it is always life." The boy, puzzled, walked away. To him, a meal was just a thing to be served or eaten, but to Shino, a bowl was a world. When autumn came rolling in, with red and gold leaves drifting across the courtyard, the rice harvests found their way to the Lord's granary. There were celebrations in the estate, visiting daimyo, cascading sake and sweet chestnut rice for the elites. The servants, however, cooked zisui, a thick rice soup made from the remnants burned at the bottom of large cauldrons. These brown, chewy bits were revered among them. Shino always scraped them carefully, soaking them in broth with shredded greens and dried shiitake. In cold nights, the sticky soup clung to their stomachs like a soft blanket, giving them strength to face biting winds during midnight chores. Over time, Shino's body grew lean and muscled from hauling water buckets and splitting wood. Her face remained calm as porcelain, but inside, a quiet flame of pride burned. She was a servant, yes, but a servant who nourished not only herself, but all the silent workers around her. Her miso soup heated stiff hands, her rice gruel soothed weary legs, and her humble barley bowls brought smiles to lips bruised by harsh words from superiors. One winter night, a snowflake swirled outside like whispered secrets. Lord Hayashi's wife gave birth to a healthy son. The entire household buzzed with joy. Guests arrive bearing lavish dishes, sea bream encrusted with salt, sweet rolls of kombu tied with gold twine, jewel-like sweets of red and white. When the feasting was done, Shino gathered the scraps, the tops of sea bream cheeks, bits of simmered vegetables, and a few forgotten dumplings. Carefully, she stirred them into a large pot of rice soup, creating a fragrant, hearty ozone. At midnight, she and the servants ate this glorious concoction in complete silence. Savoring more than just flavor, it was a taste of celebration. Even with their feet numb and backs aching, they smiled. Years would pass. Shino's hair would thin, and her miso barrels would deepen in flavor. Seasons would turn in predictable cycles: cold miso in winter, herb rice in spring, pickles in summer, sticky rice soup in autumn. There would be hardship, always, but she would continue making bowls of quiet nourishment, humility, and strength. Though no one would carve her name into stone or paint her face on parchment, her legacy lived in the warmth of these simple meals. For it was her soups and stews, her rice and pickles, that allowed an entire household to function. The samurai might have wielded blades and spoken of honor, but it was Shino and servants like her through their humble wooden bowls, their ever-giving hands, and their quiet, steadfast routines who truly nourished the heart of the warrior. Wait. And so, in the steaming swirl rising from a simple bowl, there lay the spirit of devotion, far deeper than any sword could ever carve. A hush often settled over the archives of Edo Castle, a silence so thin and fragile that one feared even a heavy breath might tear it. In this world of ordered corridors and quiet chambers lived the scroll guardians, custodians, chosen not for their strength of sword, but for their tenderness of hand. Among them was Cad, a young woman of 22 springs. His life since childhood had revolved around fibers of paper, threads of silk, and ink so faint it could disappear if stroked too harshly. Kad was the daughter of a retired samurai who had fallen in battle before she could remember his voice. Her mother, a seamstress, stitched fine kimonos for the court and saved enough to apprentice her daughter into the revered but secluded art of makemono hosen, the preservation of samurai scrolls, while others served their lords through combat or counsel. Cad offered her loyalty in the form of healing paper wounds, reviving faded history, and maintaining the soul of Japan's lineage through written memory. Her day began long before the castle roosters crowed. Lantern in hand, she'd tiptoe down stone corridors lined with cedar beams until she reached the inner archive, the Kurat no Ma, a chamber scented of sandalwood and dust, safeguarded by doors carved with phoenixes and dragons. Every morning she bowed deeply before crossing its wooden threshold. Even a single footstep inside felt like a journey between centuries. Within lay shelves of scrolls wrapped in silk brocades, protected from wind, insects, moisture, and careless eyes. Some scrolls recorded clan alliances, others battle strategies, a few detailed tea ceremonies, poetry contests, and diplomatic agreements with far-off lands. Yet each, whether humble or majestic, received the same reverence. To Cad, they did not simply hold text. They whispered. If she leaned close, she could almost hear the scribes whose hands once trembled as they inked fateful words. Her tools were minimal but sacred: bamboo tweezers for lifting fragile corners, coarsehair brushes for dusting away centuries of neglect, rice starch paste for gentle mending, and sheets of washi handmade mulberry paper that she applied like translucent bandages over the scroll's wounds. Each movement had to be deliberate. One winter morning, as snowflakes drifted like pale blossoms outside, Cad was summoned by Master Hisamatu Takaharu, the head curator. His long beard was white, but his eyes remained sharp as a whetted blade. "Cad to know," he whispered in his echoing voice. "Today you shall work on the Kenshin scroll. It has returned from Lord Matsudra's estate after 3 centuries. The task is yours alone." Cad's heart struck against her ribs. The Kenshin scroll was legendary, an account of Asugi Kenshin's philosophies of war and ethics, written during the height of the Sengoku period. Samurai had once gone into battle with these ideals bound tightly to their hearts. To lay hands upon such power, even only to preserve it, was both terrifying and exalted. She bowed so deeply her forehead brushed the tatami mat. "I would treat it as though it were the breath of life itself, master." The scroll arrived wrapped in a faded brocade of deep indigo, embroidered with cranes. As Cad slowly unfurled it atop a padded table, the air seemed to change. strokes flowed like black rivers along its surface, each kanji shaped by the shakiness of an ancient brush. Time had gnawed at parts of its edges, nibbled by insects, fibers fragile as moth wings. Vermilion seals cracked with age. Cat closed her eyes. Centering herself, she began by mixing Nariaway's rice starch paste with utmost care, whisking it until it became clear as morning dew. With a brush as thin as a single reed hair, she outlined the torn areas. Next came the delicate step of laying minuscule pieces of washi paper, floating them onto the damaged spots like butterfly wings. Any excess paste would stain the text. Any misalignment might warp the scroll forever. Often she worked without breath, letting oxygen slip only in tiny, ghostly sips so as not to disturb a single fiber. Her hands rarely trembled, for years of practice had trained muscle and spirit. Alike, but her heart swelled with awe. She imagined Kenshin himself nodding from somewhere beyond, approving this quiet, unseen battle to keep his words alive. The restoration lasted 7 intense days and nights. During each evening, Cad slept on a futon inside the archive chamber, refusing to abandon the scroll to the chill. By oil lamp glow, she composed silent prayers that her efforts were enough that she had not failed the ancestors. Finally, the day of presenting it back to the master arrived. She wrapped the scroll in fresh silk, white as crane feathers, and placed it atop a wooden platter. When Hisamatsu and the court archivists gathered, she knelt with her back straight, hands trembling slightly not from exhaustion, but from sacred joy. Master Hisamatsu gently unwrapped the scroll, studying the restored patches, the softly blended joins. His fingers, bent with age, traced the margins. A deep hush fell over the room. Even the charcoal in the brazier stopped, crackling as though it too listened. "You have done more than preserve paper," he said at last, his voice thick. "You have preserved spirit." Cad bowed, tears forming behind her lashes. "History should never fade, while any of us can help it linger," she replied. Word of her accomplishment spread quietly through the castle. Soon she was entrusted with even rarer treasure scrolls of Bushido codes, secret letters from ninja clans, and diaries of forgotten court ladies whose voices might have vanished forever if not for her care. Outside the archive, samurai trained fiercely in the courtyard, their shouts and clashing swords echoing through the castle's stone walls. But within Cad's world, strength was measured not by the sharpness of blades, but by the gentleness of fingertips. She came to believe that her work was as crucial as any warrior's, for a sword could win a battle. Yes, but a scroll could capture the shifting heart of an entire era. Years passed, and Cad eventually took on apprentices. She taught them to listen truly, listen to the pages. Ink is not merely ink, she told them. It's trapped breath, frozen emotion. If you cannot hear its whispers, you are not ready. She reminded them of patience, that some wounds needed weeks of rest between mendings. That rushing was the deadliest sin in their craft, in a land that venerated honor, cords, and remembrance. Their role leaven, if unseen by most, became the quiet foundation of legacy. Emperors, daimyo, and scholars all relied on these delicate guardians to maintain their connection to eternity. And so, the archives grew, not merely in size, but in soul, toward the end of her life. Cad often returned to the Kenshin scroll, brushing her fingers along its once torn edges. It had become a symbol to her not of war, but of resilience. Like people, pages aged, tore, and weakened, but with care and respect, they could be healed, remembered, understood. One evening, as the summer cicadas chirped outside, Kid sat alone in the archives, cradling a brush in her hand. She gazed across hundreds of neatly arranged scrolls and thought of her journey. She realized she had spent her life not merely preserving documents, but protecting Japan's heartbeat, carrying its whispered pages across time so future generations could hold them close. When she finally closed her tired eyes, dreams came not of glory or recognition, but of fluttering paper and swirling ink-cup voices, long past, still singing inside every fiber dot. For in the end, Cad believed that the truest power did not reside in swords that clashed loudly beneath the sun, but in fragile scrolls that, long after blood had dried and empires turned to dust, continued to whisper softly into the silence, ensuring that nothing and no one was ever truly forgotten. As the final blush of the sun bled into the mountains surrounding Edo, shadows stretched long across the gravel paths of Lord Hideo Kurosuru's estate. Sprawling household, with its sloping tiled roofs and lacquered wooden walkways, began to soften under the embrace of nightfall. Lamps in the main hall had yet to be lit, but already the quiet scuttling of servants hinted at the work about to begin, an intricate choreography of evening rituals that had long kept the great house running like clockwork. In a cramped corner behind the great storehouse lived Haru, a thin, sharp 17-year-old boy whose hands were always chapped from scrubbing, hauling, and trimming. Though only recently accepted as a jenny, the lowest-ranked house servant, he carried himself with the care and purpose of someone far older. Tonight, like every night, he would help guide the transition from day to evening, a time the samurai valued deeply, for it was in these twilight hours that peace, meditation, and reflection were believed to be strongest. The first bell, a soft gong rung by the gatekeeper, signaled the official start of dusk. Haru hurried into the courtyard, his wooden sandals clacking against the stone as he joined a line of other young servants around a long, low bench of bamboo baskets. Each basket was filled with thick candles made from purified beeswax, carefully molded by the elderly candlemaker who served the household. For the main corridors, special lanterns crafted from stout pine ribs and covered with white oiled washi paper would be used. Their sides bore ink brush paintings of cranes and pines, symbols of longevity, meant to bless the house's nighttime hours. Carry them gently, hissed Tomo, the stern Jiroku in charge of internal lighting. She was a wiry woman in her late 30s who could silence a room simply by raising an eyebrow. A crushed lantern brings bad fortune. Haru swallowed and lifted 2 lanterns from the bench, cradling the lacquered wood handles close to his chest. Others did the same, fanning out across the estate in pairs, at each corridor junction, at every veranda door. And outside each paper-walled sitting room, lamps were placed on small stone pedestals or hung from hooks of bronze. They would not be lit until the second bell. Tradition dictated that the estate honor the in-between time, brief window after sundown, where neither day nor night truly ruled. It was said that during this half-light, ancestral spirits might wander and inspect their descendants. Lord Hideo, a man of strict Confucian leanings, allowed such folk beliefs to persist among the servants. He understood that fear kept them hard-working and loyal. As Haru moved along the Nishi corridor, he passed Yui and Ichiro, twin siblings, employed as tea servants, scattering fine white sand along the porch edges to prevent slipping on damp wood. Each of them carried a bamboo basket filled with crushed seashells and river grit. With every toss of powder, the hallways took on a faint shimmer, ready to welcome passing feet. By the time Haru placed his last lantern at the entrance to the household shrine, the sky behind the pagoda rooftops had turned from amber to deep purple. Crickets had begun their nightly song, and somewhere in the pine forest, a solitary owl called. Haru wiped his brow with the sleeve of his faded blue tunic and hurried toward the eastern shed where kindling was stored. Tonight he would help light the fires. Inside the shed, slanted shafts of moonlight broke through warped wood slats, revealing stacked bundles of cedar twigs, fat pine cones, and slivers of oak. Already waiting there was Kazuma, the pot-bellied cook's assistant, lighting his first bundle with flint. Haru knelt beside him, struck his own stone, and waited until his spark caught onto the wood. Once the flame roared with confidence, he carefully carried it, using iron tongs, down the winding path toward the main kitchen hearth. He felt, as he always did, a sudden flush of pride for just a few breaths. He was the master of light and dark in the kitchen. Great iron braziers used for simmering soup and rice earlier in the day now doubled as heating pits. Haru placed his small burning bundle in a clay bowl at each corner of the room. Soon, shadows danced up the soot-blackened walls, and Kazuma began placing clay lamps around the space, preparing to keep them lit till dawn. The cooks would awaken before any other servants to start breakfast preparations, and they needed warmth and visibility long before sunrise. Back outside, the second bell finally rang, a sharper, more insistent gong that echoed through the entire compound. Servants rushed from every direction to ignite the lanterns previously set. They moved like phantoms, their footsteps quick but soundless over wooden floors. Wick after wick was touched with fire until the corridors began to glow with a mysterious golden haze. Lanterns beside tatami rooms flickered like watchful eyes. Haru's final duty for the hour was his favorite. He took a paper-covered hand lantern shaped like an elongated egg and walked through the garden path, illuminating stepping stones that meandered past koi ponds and manicured shrubs. The garden was a place of serenity for the samurai. After dinner, Lord Hideo would walk these paths, sometimes alone with his thoughts, other times accompanied by his wife, Lady Akiko. So it fell upon Haru to ensure no shadows were sharp enough to trip them, and no dead leaves lay strewn to offend their eyes. As he walked, he gently nudged aside small rocks and picked up fallen ginkgo leaves. When he reached the stone bridge arching over a bubbling stream, he paused. Below, a carp surfaced with a lazy flip of its tail. The light from Haru's lamp caught its golden scales for a heartbeat, setting them aflame like living treasure. Haru smiled. Moments like this, tiny breaths of beauty, made the endless work worthwhile. Back near the main house, preparations were now shifting to the serving of the evening meal. Haru joined a group of servants, crouched around a lacquered tray, holding bowls of steaming miso soup, pickled vegetables, grilled river fish, and rice glossed with sesame. Usually, samurai servants ate in a separate hall, but tonight they would first deliver the master's food. They moved in a tight procession, Haru at the rear, carrying a small sake bottle warmed over embers. With elbows tucked, eyes lowered, and footsteps measured, they entered the Lord's dining chamber. Lord Hideo sat on a red cushion embroidered with gold thread. His eldest son, Daichi, knelt beside him, polishing his wakizashi blade. Though Haru dared not lift his eyes fully, he could see the faint shimmer of armor at the back of the room, proof that the retainers had returned from patrol. One by one, bowls were placed before the Lord. Ceramic lids were removed with slow grace, releasing curls of fragrant steam. Haru knelt close, poured sake into Lord Hideo's cup until it was precisely 70% full, a mark of respect. Then, backing away like a retreating tide, he slipped out into the hallway. Only when the servants returned to their own quarters did they eat. Their dinner was far simpler. Barley rice, daikon soup, thickened with scraps of chicken skin, and pickled plums. They ate quickly, knowing that once the plates were washed, the next ritual would begin, the nightly patrol. By this hour, the lanterns cast stronger glow, making each corridor feel longer than in daylight. Haru was partnered with an older servant named Goro for the patrol. In hushed tones, they checked each gate latch, inspected Komeinu stone dog statues for cracks, and ensured sliding paper doors were secured. The patrol was not only for security, it honored the belief that servants walked not just for safety, but as unseen guardians of the household's harmony. As Haru crept with Goro along the northern wall, he sensed movement. He stiffened, only to realize it was the fluttering of a moth circling a lantern. The creature beat its wings against the glowing paper, desperately, drawn by the warmth, until, with a soft hiss, it singed itself and fell. Goro murmured, "Not even insects resist light's call." Haru nodded quietly and continued. Their inspection ended near the private study, a room sealed not with paper walls, but solid cedar doors. Inside, Lord Hideo often meditated by himself late into the night. Haru and Goro were forbidden to enter, but they would eavesdrop for confirmation the Lord was still awake. Tonight, they heard it, the subtle swish of brush on parchment, the gentle clink of an inkstone lid. Lord Hideo was writing poetry perhaps, or reviewing war documents. Either way, it meant they must keep their lamps burning till at least the 4th hour of the night. Goro dismissed Haru back to the servant quarters so he could rest before his final shift. Haru trudged back, exhaustion yawning beneath his ribs. But even in fatigue, he moved with care. For servants who tarnished the peace of the night were punished harshly. A single cracked cup, a dropped lantern, and days' worth of rice could be taken from their rations. Outside his door, he paused and looked up at the sky. Clouds had rolled away, revealing a spill of stars, so sharp it seemed the heavens had cracked. Soft auras from the lanterns brushed the eaves, creating a world of gold and velvet black. Haru breathed in the scent of pine, resin, soy, smoke, and damp, earth. This, he thought, is the heart of the household, not swords or flags, but the glow we carry when night swallows the sun. Inside, this room was little more than a box with straw mats and a gray wool blanket. He lay down, curling on his side. But though his body begged for sleep, his mind floated back through the rituals of the evening, the lighting of lamps, the laying of shadows, the sacred hush that accompanied the samurai household as it drifted deeper into night. The hush of the early morning wrapped itself around the vast samurai residence like a careful promise. Frost shimmered on the wooden veranda, and mist curled slowly from the koi pond nestled in the inner courtyard. Beyond carefully raked gravel and winding stepping stones, a quiet army had already awakened, the servants of the household. Those who moved like breaths of wind through rooms, hallways, and storerooms, carrying out their duties without fanfare, without complaint, and, most notably, without voices. To serve a house of honor meant mastering not only visible action, but also the invisible language of silence. Words, here, were considered clumsy, blunt tools that risked tarnishing the space with needless sound. The servants who attended these noble warriors wielded, instead, an elegant system of signs, glances, gestures, and rituals built over generations, a form of communication refined as sharply as any katana. Among these servants was a Kiko, a slender young woman with hair always tightly wrapped into a neat coil, whose footsteps never betrayed her presence. She had entered the household at the age of 13, when her father passed away in the distant mountains. Now nearing 20, she was widely respected for her ability to anticipate needs before they were uttered, and to orchestrate whole tasks through silence alone. On her first day, she had learned the most basic gesture, a slow inclining of the head with eyes lowered, signaling agreement or understanding. Every newcomer practiced it, often awkwardly, under the watchful gaze of the senior chamberlain. But that was merely the gate into a far more complex art. A stroke of the fingers along the sleeve meant danger. A quick, sharp glance toward the floorboards cautioned that someone approached. Folding the hands quietly across the stomach, palms touching, asked for discreet assistance. For time, bodies became entire scripts and eyes flickered like brushstrokes. The household within these walls functioned like a silent orchestra. Each morning began before the sun dared to rise. Kiko would slide open the rice paper door of her small sleeping room. Without a single spoken word, she acknowledged her fellow servants, a nod to Ichiro the stable boy, a lowered chin toward Mariko, the laundry girl. A shared breath with old Masuda, who oversaw the kitchen. Each would respond in kind. Their exchanges, telling entire stories. Yes, I saw the rice was nearly gone in the storeroom. The Lord's second son returned late last night. The lantern oil must be rationed carefully today. Conversations passed between them as easily as streams through bamboo, with only their eyes, hands, and stillness. On one particularly cold morning, when frost had silvered the world, Akiko stepped into the kitchen to find Matsuda already stirring a pot of miso. He looked up at her, then down at a stone near the hearth. In an instant, she understood. The stone's placement indicated a change in schedule. The Lord had decided to host a morning meeting with a visiting dignitary. That meant more rice, more tea, and everything must be ready a full hour early. Akiko only gave a tiny shift of her shoulders and moved swiftly with no verbal confirmation. Without calling out, she found Mariko, pointing with 2 fingers toward the outer corridor where the visiting samurai would walk. Mariko's eyes widened briefly, the sign of understanding, and she hurried to fetch scented cloths and fresh, tatami coverings. What appeared to outsiders like pure intuition was really a disciplined dance, learned through years of shared silence. To err in this choreography was to invite shame. Once, when Akiko was still young, she had misinterpreted a gesture from Taro, another servant. With the wrong message, she had polished the wrong set of armor for the master's son, only for the latter to discover smudges and dust just before a duel, though no one beat her. The disappointment had radiated from the chamberlain in a single, heavy glance, so powerful that Akiko had nearly collapsed from guilt. Ever since, she studied every eyelid blink, every pinky twitch, every deliberate pause between footfalls. There were deeper layers of communication too, layers considered almost sacred. When danger threatened, perhaps a thief in the night, or an assassin sneaking through hedges, the servants would not scream or shout. Instead, they sent signals rippling through the property. A swift removal of a lantern from its hook meant to summon reinforcements. A meandering route, taken deliberately in sight of others, could reveal hidden threats. In extraordinary circumstances, they used small wooden tiles, each marked with a carving invisible to those uninitiated. A swirl for fire, a triangle for intruder, a spiral for illness. These tiles, when placed near water jars or behind scrolls, triggered silent alarms understood only by servants. More than once, this system had saved the household from disaster. Yet, perhaps the most astonishing of all was how silence itself became not merely a tool, but a philosophy. The servants internalized the belief that true loyalty did not need constant expression. They learned to listen solely with the heart and perceive with all senses poised. The faintest scrape of a sandal, the soft rustle of silt, or a subtle change in the rhythm of wind through bamboo could become whispers to be answered. Over time, they could sense the emotions of their lords and react without being asked. If the master returned from a council looking stiff and unsmiling, tea was served hotter and more bitter. If he came with softened shoulders and relaxed brow, sweets found their way onto his tray. No one told them to do so. It was simply how a servant lived. As the years passed, Akiko became so fluent in this vocabulary of stillness that she hardly remembered a life full of spoken language. Even among her fellow servants, conversations in words had become rare. She recalled speaking only when asked directly by a superior, a few polite syllables of hi, yes, or wakarimashita, I understand. Her thoughts did not crave conversation. Instead, they embraced a form of mutual awareness, communion through shared duty. One afternoon, when sakura petals began their gentle descent from the courtyard trees, Kiko was carrying newly polished tea bowls to the reception chamber. Suddenly, she saw old Masuda situating himself awkwardly beside the doorway. His back curved into a crescent, and his right hand lingering at his chest. It was not one of their standard signs. She froze for the briefest moment, attempting to decode. Matsuda gave no movement except a twitch of fingers. Realization struck. He was struggling to breathe, but did not want to disrupt the coming ceremony. Akiko, her heart pounding, gave a deliberate stumble, so her tray clattered loudly against the wooden floor. The noise was shocking inside such a quiet world, but the rules brought other servants rushing, signaling out Ichiro with a swift, downturned palm and 2 blinks. Urgent but silent, she gestured toward Matsuda. Together, they helped him to the back corridor where he could rest. Not a word was exchanged, but life may have been saved. Ironically, this outburst of noise, though intentional, earned Akiko a stern look from the chamberlain later. He did not scold with words. Instead, his silence stretched long, like a winter night. Even that silence had a meaning. Remember our ways. So, she bowed deeply, acknowledging his message without protest, and reaffirmed her commitment by redoubling her attentiveness. The next day, she communicated only through perfect gestures, even breathing more softly than usual, as if to apologize for each sound she had ever made. Many years would pass, and the samurai house would survive uprisings, political shifts, and financial hardships. But what endured within its walls was the unbroken lineage of silent servants. Akiko, once a novice, became the elderly custodian of these invisible teachings. When young recruits arrived from nearby villages, nervous, clumsy, loud in their movements, she did not lecture them. Instead, she showed them. She would catch their gaze and hold it gently until they stilled. She would motion with the fingertip, barely moving, to show how to pour water without splash, how to bow in a corridor without creaking floorboards, how to convey meaning without ever disturbing the sacred quiet of samurai dignity. In her final year of service, when gray streaked her once black hair, a rumor reached her that other households in distant towns relied on servants who shouted commands and barked orders. She found the very thought bewildering, as if someone had suggested building a rock garden with hammers and axes. True beauty, she believed, lived in restraint, strength, and self-control. Loyalty and understanding that did not require expression. One spring morning, knowing her time was near, Akiko knelt in the garden as petals swirled around her. She placed a single wooden tile beside the pond, one carved with an ancient character she had never used until now. It meant farewell. No one had instructed her, but this too was part of the silent language. Later that afternoon, as other servants discovered the tile, they didn't cry or call out. Instead, they bowed their heads, touched their palms together over their hearts, and continued their duties. Akiko passed away quietly in her sleep that night, leaving behind a legacy not written in ink or stone, but preserved in the silent movements of all who came after. Mist rose gently off the damp earth as the first light of dawn spilled across the stone walls of the samurai estate, in the narrow corridors tucked behind the grand manor. Long before their masters stirred from their slumber, awoke a silent world, a motion one orchestrated not by command, but by tradition, discipline, and an unspoken devotion. Here lived the samurai servants, whose unseen hands kept the daily gears turning and whose quiet steps greeted every sunrise as faithfully as a temple's gong. Just past the bamboo gate at the servants' quarters, a bell gently chimed to announce the fourth watch of morning. Matsu, a young attendant barely 19, peeled himself from his thin tatami mat, shivering slightly as the cool air kissed his skin. He folded his blanket quickly, tucking it away in the wooden wall chest, before kneeling to bow toward a small ancestral tablet resting in their modest alcove. Even in this humble space, discipline thrived alongside simplicity. The tablet received a whispered prayer of gratitude and strength for the coming day. His first task awaited at the estate's well. Barefoot, He padded across the stone path slick with dew, the edges of his faded robe brushing against wild violets that clung stubbornly between the cracks. He pulled up heavy pails of water, muscles working in quiet rhythm, careful not to splash. Today, like every day, he would prepare steaming basins for cleansing his master's face and hands, scenting them delicately with yuzu pills. Maintaining the illusion of effortless nobility required labor unseen. Someone had to gather the water, light the fires, and perfume the air. Further down the garden, servant women in muted blues and grays tiptoed among the iris beds. One, Tomiko, nimble in her movements despite her petite frame, carried a basket of fresh herbs, Japanese mint, lemon leaves, and a few sprigs of pine. These would be boiled in the kitchen hearth to create a fragrant vapor to greet the samurai lord as he awakened. In the stillness, the soft rustle of her clothing was accompanied by the rhythmic snapping of twigs as gardeners pruned and shaped the shrubs in geometric perfection. Their work began well before the first birds sang, grass still, wet, and bending. Beneath their feet, the servants threaded together like parts of a delicate machine, each action purposeful, rehearsed, honed over years of repetition. For Matsu, after delivering water to the main corridor, he moved swiftly to polish the household's wooden floors. He dipped a cloth in warm rice water polish he had prepared the night before, drawing it across the cedar floorboards in smooth strokes. The wood drank in the moisture and gleamed faintly, ready to reflect the elegance of noble feet soon to tread upon it. Yet it was not enough for him to simply clean. Every corridor, every railing needed to gleam just so. There must be no trace of footprint nor dust. Matsu clenched his jaw in concentration, recalling his older brother's words, once also a household servant before earning transfer to a more prestigious estate. The best servant is a shadow. He leaves no trace behind, but nothing escapes his notice. Meanwhile, beneath the main hall, two male servants dragged open the lacquered chest containing the armor stands. Though their master would not don the full set today, there was no battle to be fought. The armor still required reverent polishing. Each plate was wiped with gauze, cloth soaked in a secret mixture of oils passed down from senior servant to junior. The sound of metal gently clinking echoed through the storage chamber like distant wind chimes. Their polished helmets and cuirasses must remain immaculate, not for combat alone, but for pride, heritage, and vigilance. In the tea house, elderly Kiku tended the delicate Tanami mats. She had served the household for almost 40 years and still took pride in the fresh, grassy scent of newly replaced reeds. Each morning, she brushed the mats softly with a broom of bundled cattail fibers, removing any loose husks. She then inspected the edges for fraying threads, trimming them so not a single rugged corner offended the eyes or feet. For samurai dignitaries who might arrive unexpectedly, the tea room must always reflect serenity. By now, the sky had shifted from inky blue to pale blush, heralding the approaching sun. From the cookhouse came drifting smells of steamed rice, miso broth, and roasted barley tea. Young servants fed the fires with careful fingers, coaxing embers as though they were ancient spirits to be honored. Tomiko returned with rice vinegar, 2 pickles sliced daikon radish in anticipation of breakfast. No harsh clangs of kitchen blades were permitted at this hour, so instead she steadied her breathing and moved with flowing grace, slicing vegetables with surgical precision. Out in the courtyard, the stable boys led the horses out for a brisk walk, though they could not speak to the animals loudly. Not at dawn. Never at dawn. Their body language was gentle, yet firm. They brushed dust from glossy coats with straw brushes and whispered praise into soft ears. The clop of hooves on stone was muffled with great care. A startled horse whinnying too early could awaken a lord, and a restless lord at dawn was bad omen for the entire day's peace. Through all this, servants communicated by gestures, raised eyebrows, or slight taps of the finger. Silence was paramount. Sound was precious. Matsu recalled his first month when he had accidentally spilled water and uttered a panicked gasp. The kitchen chief had struck his hand swiftly with a ladle, not out of cruelty, but necessity. "Your breath is not yours to waste," she had hissed, "until master's breath greets the day." Slowly, the moments tightened toward sunrise. Servants positioned themselves along key hallways like stagehands awaiting their cue. At precisely the right moment, when the first ray of sunlight kissed the gilded emblem above the entrance hall, the chief attendant gently slid open the inner door to the Lord's chambers. Bowing so low his forehead brushed the floor, he murmured that it was time to awaken. The Lord, conditioned by years of routine, stirred only then, never before. Rising to the faint sounds of the estate coming alive beyond his sliding screens, while the samurai lord freshened himself and donned his morning robes, servants moved swiftly to lay down his breakfast tray, lacquered box of rice, pickles, fish cured in miso. The tea, brewed at the first bubble, never the second, was poured in a shallow bowl. Steam ascended like incense trailing toward heaven. As the Lord ate, Matsu stood perfectly still just inside the doorway, ready to serve, but hoping never to be noticed. His heartbeat drummed faster than his still expression ever betrayed once the Lord departed to his morning practice. Donning simpler training clothes and gripping his wooden bakken, the servants exhaled. Almost dawn routine had passed. A task. Now came the rest of the day's endless tasks. Kitchens would erupt with controlled chaos. Laundry would be scrubbed with ash and soap root. Letters would be carried swiftly to surrounding villages. Children of the household would require supervision, and elderly retainers needed their rooms. Arid and warmed, but dawn was sacred, almost ceremonial, where duty met devotion in hushed footfalls and shimmering beads of morning dew left behind on sleeves. At last, Matsu allowed himself a moment in the back garden, in front of the narrow stream winding under a stone bridge. He crouched near the water, splashing his face to wake his senses fully. The reflected sky above him was no longer purple or gray, but brightening quickly into cheerful gold. As he gazed into the shifting ripples, he remembered why he served. Not for coins or praise, but for belonging, precision, purpose. He did not wield a katana nor command troops. Yet every rice grain cooked to perfection, every tatami mat smoothed, every armor plate shined was his quiet battle fought daily. His weapon was discipline. His victory was an unbroken rhythm of service. The world might never know his name, but the story of every samurai's greatness was written in the silent work of people like him. The bell rang again. Another task summoned. Rising silently to his feet, Matsu dried his hands on his sleeves and disappeared into the morning light without a sound, leaving behind only the faintest footprints on the dew-covered stones, soon to be erased by the warmth of another rising sun. The samurai manors of feudal Japan were places of bustling discipline, swords clashing in training yards, orders echoing across corridors, armor polished to a mirror-like sheen. Visitors often admired the sharp edges of such life, the rigorous hierarchy, the unwavering loyalty, the unmistakable clang of martial devotion. Yet, lying quietly beyond these scenes of strength and honor were small, often unnoticed realms of serenity, hidden gardens, cultivated not by renowned warriors, but by the unseen hands of samurai servants. These were the secret spaces of calm, protected and nurtured by those who found solace not in combat, but in the subtle art of growing beauty in silence. Among these keepers of quiet was Masa, a young servant boy with hair tied back in a simple knot, sleeves forever stained with damp earth. He had entered the house of Lord Arakawa as a stable hand, but soon found his heart straying from horses to something more delicate. From the very first morning, when he had seen sunlight dripping through bamboo leaves behind an unused storehouse. He sensed that the soul of this household did not beat only in its armor and weapons. It breathed also beneath the moss petals and vibrant wood sorrel that peeped from hidden corners. The head servant, stern-faced Obazan soon noticed his lingering gaze and mud-speckled knees. Rather than scolding him, she nodded, eyes twinkling with unspoken understanding. "If you wish to serve the house," she said, "then learn not only to sharpen its blades, but also its spirit. Come before dawn tomorrow." The next morning, before even the kettles bubbled for rice, Masa followed her past the main courtyard, beyond the ornamental pond meant for noble guests, down a narrow corridor rarely used. At its end was a low wooden gate, half disguised beneath a woven net of climbing wisteria. Bazan bent and eased it open, revealing one of the household's oldest secrets, a garden so small and humble it seemed part dream, part memory. Morning mist clung to tiny white blossoms. Moss cushioned every stone. When bells whispered in gentle warning, "Not all treasures come emblazoned in gold. This is the Kokor Niwa, the hidden garden," she said. "Only the servants tend it, and few even know of its existence. It is not for display. It is for balance." She placed a wooden rake in his hand. "To serve the warriors, we must also serve their souls." So Masa began a new path. Each day, while swords were sharpened and banners unfurled, he would slip away to the Kokor Niwa, accompanied by two older servants, gentle Riku, who seemed to speak only to the koi fish gliding through a stone basin, and Aya, a wiry woman whose feet barely disturbed the fallen leaves. Together, they formed a quiet fellowship of tender-hearted caretakers. Their tools were humble: bamboo rakes, bronze shears, watering ladles carved from gourds. Their mission was delicate: to keep alive a garden that seemed almost sentient, responsive to the quiet sorrows and laughter of the house. In spring, they coaxed shy violets into bloom along the base of the granite lantern. In summer, they trimmed the camellia leaves so sunlight fell like stars upon the moss. In autumn, they swept leaves into meditative spirals, each pattern symbolizing a story only they understood: loyalty, longing, patience. And in winter, when frost traced crystalline maps across every stone, they covered tender roots with hand-woven straw mats, murmuring small prayers for survival. It was back-breaking work done in near secrecy. If discovered by higher-ranking samurai, the space might be improved, transformed into yet another ornamental feature for political guests. Thus, tending it meant tending its invisibility as much as its growth. Masa, though young, came to recognize how the Kokor Niwa influenced the rhythms of the manor beyond. Warriors sometimes arrived at the edge of the service hallway, agitated from training or troubled by rumors of impending conflict. They might pause unknowingly beside the thin slats concealing the garden and find themselves stilling, breathing deeper, swept by a calm they could not explain. Some swore the hallway smelled faintly of plum blossoms, even in midwinter. Others noticed that their anger dissolved faster in this corner of the house. They credited discipline, tea, or divine intervention, never realizing that it was a hidden cradle of moss and stone that soothed their spirits from behind thin walls. One evening, news arrived that Lord Arakawa would host a delegation from a rival clan. Whispers flowed among the servants. The negotiations would be tense. Some feared that even a minor insult could spark bloodshed at dawn. That night, while the main house rehearsed proper bowing angles and tea-serving protocols, Obazan summoned Masa and the two elder gardeners. "We will prepare the Kokor Niwa for tomorrow," said simply, by the light of paper lanterns. They worked. Riku polished each stone step until it shone like moonlight caught in solid form. Aya placed fresh cushions of moss beneath the lantern. Masa carefully pruned the tiny maple tree that arched over the garden center. At its roots, he buried a folded crimson cloth soaked in cherry blossom oil, a perfumed sacrament, long carried by servants for moments when words could not influence fate. When they finished, the garden looked like a brushstroke of peace painted upon the night. As dawn touched the horizon, the rival samurai arrived. Then the household, tension coiled like a drawn bowstring. Lord Arakawa led the guests past scroll-lined rooms, offering tea with impeccable courtesy. Yet beneath the surface, tempers threatened to flare. Unexpectedly, a passing breeze slipped through unseen cracks between the walls. The faintest hint of floral tranquility drifted through the corridor. One of the rival delegates paused, inhaled, and glanced around as though hearing a forgotten childhood lullaby. His brow softened. Negotiations continued, and by day's end, instead of departing in anger, the guests left with the promise of mutual cooperation. Lord Arakawa never knew that peace had first bloomed quietly behind the walls. Under the guardianship of his lowest servants, time passed. Masa grew into adulthood, his shoulders broader, his hands rougher, yet his touch ever gentle. Obesan Mio, hair silvering, began stepping back, watching her protege with affectionate pride. One winter, when she fell gravely ill, she asked Masa to kneel at her side. "Promise me," she whispered, "even if this household changes, even if the warriors think only of war, that you will keep tending the garden and keep its peace alive." Masa bowed deeply, tears silently dropping onto his work-worn hands. "I swear it." After she passed, he rose to take her place, guiding new young servants into the quiet rituals of care. Many came and went, bearing dreams of rising in status, or earning notice from their warrior masters. Yet a few remained, captivated by the quiet heart of the manor. Together, they sustained the garden like a pulse beneath the armor of the samurai way. Years later, enemies once again encircled the region. Lord Arakawa was forced to fortify his household. One day, he summoned his servants and announced new plans. Walls would be reinforced, gates expanded, unused spaces converted into armories. Masa's heart turned to ice as he realized the Kokoro Niwa might be destroyed in the process. That night, unable to sleep, he walked the winding corridors until he reached the hidden gate. The wisteria vines trembled in the winter wind as though knowing what was coming. Determined, Masa knelt in the garden, resting his forehead against the cold stone basin. He stayed there through the night, whispering stories into the soil, memories of Obesan, Mio, Aya, Riku, and all the quiet acts that had kept peace alive in the household. "You are the soul," he murmured. "I will not let you fade." Exhausted, he finally fell asleep among the moss cushions he had once laid by hand. At dawn, sandal steps approached. Masa awoke to see Lord Arakawa standing at the gate, surprised to find one of his servants curled within the garden. The Lord stepped inside slowly, gaze sweeping across the tiny realm. Morning frost glittered atop leaves. Sunlight purled on stone. Even a hardened warrior couldn't help but feel the hush deep in his bones. "How long has this place existed?" he asked. Masa bowed low. "Long before I arrived, my lord. It's passed down from servant to servant. Its purpose is serenity." Lord Arakawa considered this, fingertips grazing the edge of a mossy stone. "I have always wondered," he said quietly, "why walking this corridor eased my mind before battle. I thought it was superstition." His eyes softened, not with weakness, but wisdom. "Perhaps we ought not to destroy everything in pursuit of strength." That afternoon, new orders were issued. The walls would be thickened, but the Kokoro Niwa would remain untouched, protected by additional planks and a carefully concealed walkway. It would continue to exist, not as an ornament, but as a beating heart, walled within wood and stone. Secret though it remained, it would influence the lives within the household for generations to come. In the decades that followed, the House of Arakawa saw both triumphs and tragedies. Sons of samurai became fathers. Wars came and went like storms beating against mountain cliffs. But behind it all, the garden remained. Each new head servant was quietly sworn in at dawn with a bamboo rake pressed into their hands and a vow whispered to moss and stone. Samurai died righteously on battlefields. But a different kind of victory was won in the hidden calm, where petals were encouraged to bloom, where the memory of laughter and loss fed the soil, where peace was not declared, but nurtured. The hush of night fell carefully over the sprawling estate of Lord Hoshino, as though even the wind feared to rustle a leaf without permission. The moon, a polished silver coin in the sky, drifted between gauzy clouds, casting faint light on rooftops tiled in black lacquer. From afar, it might have seemed that everyone within the grand walls slept peacefully, lost to dreams behind closed shish-ji screens. But deep within the quiet, a steady heartbeat of hidden vigilance pulsed. The nighttime watch of the samurai servants was beginning. Megumi, daughter of a seamstress and servant from birth, knelt silently on the wooden veranda, holding a polished bronze lantern trimmed with simple hemp rope. She was 23, her spine straight with devotion, her eyes trained by long practice to see clearly in darkness. Her white cassoud overlapped neatly under a gray work robe, tied with a faded indigo obi. She had served the Hoshino household since she was 6, first cleaning tatami mats, later assisting with sword oiling, and recently entrusted with the sacred responsibility of the night vigil. Only servants of exceptional discipline earned such an honor, for during the hours when shadows moved and whispers carried, the household relied not on noble samurai with gleaming armor, but on quiet, unseen hands like Megumi's. Tonight, say, she walked softly along the eastern corridor. Below her, an intricate garden of rock, moss, and carefully pruned pines lay in serene repose. Each night, she traced this route, stopping at 6 exact points to listen. Vigil here was not a march of clanging armor, but a choreography of stillness. She paused by a sliding door, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the young heir, 13-year-old Katsuro. Beyond him, past inner walls, another servant kept watch in the archive where priceless scrolls were stored. Their pattern of patrols was designed to spiral inward, so that no path was crossed twice too quickly, yet no corner remained unwatched. Elsewhere. Hayat, a wiry servant with sharp cheekbones and a softer soul than he admitted, leaned beside a plum tree near the rear gate. His task was to remain unseen, blending into the shadows, while his mind stayed alert for any rustle that did not belong to crickets or bamboo leaves. He carried no sword-armed servants, were rare and only allowed under special circumstances, but hidden beneath his sleeve was a small iron Tessin fan. Its edges hardened for emergency defense. He murmured softly to himself, recounting the Buddhist chant that helped focus his mind. It was not fear he felt toward the outside world, but a humble terror of failing his post. To be caught sleeping during the watch was not merely a dismissal. It was disgrace to one's family name for generations. Yet to perform it well brought no fanfare. The best compliments were invisible. Peace maintained, danger never arriving. No one ever knowing the servants spent their night battling fatigue beneath cold moon. Inside one of the clay-walled guardrooms, 2 older servants, Hisashi and Tomo, brewed warm tea over a charcoal brazier. They did not speak much, for nighttime speech was frowned upon. Instead, they communicated through ritualized gestures honed over years. A nod toward the east meant all is clear. 2 fingers resting on the teacup signaled switch patrol next quarter hour. In this way, they preserved silence, even in company. Their loyalty reflected in discipline rather than noise. Sometimes, when their bodies ached or their minds wandered toward dreams, they reminded themselves with quiet pride that while samurai lords gained glory beneath banners of battle, It was the faithful servants who ensured those banners remained unblemished while peace reigned. Midnight came, and with it, the subtle changing of patrol positions. Megumi crossed paths with Hayat near the water barrels by the storage house. Without a word, they exchanged brief, knowing looks. Their lanterns dipped in silent greeting, not of camaraderie as ordinary folk might share, but of bonded respect, like two threads woven tightly into a single weave. The air was colder now. Megumi felt it through the soles of her jikatabi. She thought fleetingly of the futon awaiting her at dawn, and of her mother who had long retired from service after illness. Still, her face remained impassive, her ears catching the far-off call of an owl. She turned toward the narrow passage near the granary, where a small breach in the wall had been repaired only last month. The plaster there was fresh, slightly lighter in color than the surrounding earth. No servant ever forgot to examine it. She crouched, lantern shuttered behind her sleeve to reduce light, touching the ground gently. No footprints, no twigs broken, only the faint smell of cedar wood from the rebuilt post. Satisfied, she rose and continued her loop in Lord Hoshino's audience hall. A pair of decorative spears stood beside an ink painting of wild cranes flying over rocky cliffs. Behind hidden latticework, was a crossbase, a secret route. The servants knew, and samurai pretended not to know. Through it, they could pass from one wing to another, unseen. Tonight, Tomo, despite her 50 years, slipped through it with practiced ease, scarred from decades of scrubbing and lifting, brushed aside cobwebs. She always moved here around the third hour because one could see the faintest light from the western, lanterns filtering through cracks, making it easier to watch for intruders. She wiped her brow with a sleeve and smiled faintly. 40 years. She had done this, and never once had an enemy come. That, to her, was proof of duty fulfilled, that no one ever needed to draw a sword just before the cock crowed. While most of the household dreamt of plum blossoms or heroic sagas, one unusual sound disturbed the pattern. A soft thud by the outer wall. Megumi froze mid-step, hand tightened on the lantern. No servant ever rushed toward noise. Haste could be as dangerous as neglect. Instead, she stepped backward, pressed herself into the darkness by a pillar, and listened. There it was again, a scrape of rope against stone. Her heart beat louder, but she controlled her breath, recalling her training. He made a signal with her lantern, tilting it twice toward Hayat's last known post. The beam reflected once on distant roof tiles, hopefully enough for him to understand. Hayat, keen-eyed as ever, noted the glint and moved cautiously in her direction, staying low behind shrubbery. Meanwhile, Megumi crept forward, inch by inch, until she saw the source, not a trespasser, but a stray bamboo pole had fallen from the stack against the back wall, likely loosened by wind. Relief swept through her silently, but she did not smile. Instead, she painstakingly replaced the pole, brushed away disturbed sand to erase any trace, and marked the location mentally for repair in tomorrow's daily report. Hayat signaled, once from the shadows, thumbs up, before disappearing again into his patrol. As dawn neared, the servants gathered briefly for one last check, faces pale in lantern light. One by one, they reported small notes to Hisashi, who recorded everything with a neat brush. North gate latch, creaked oil, needed. Lantern forewick, nearly spent. Fallen bamboo, replaced. Their voices barely rose above whispers. These reports would be transferred to the steward, who in turn passed them on to the master of servants. Lord Hoshino would never read them. He would simply awaken to a secure household, unaware that under his roof, through hours of darkness, so many vigilant souls had worked in ghostly silence for his safety. When the eastern sky turned lavender gray, signaling the first kiss of the sun, the night watch finally ended. Megumi returned to the servants' quarters, stripped off her outer robe, and folded it precisely. Her hands trembled slightly. Only now did she allow exhaustion to seep in, but she resisted sleep. Before resting, she fetched a basin of water to wash her face. Looking into the cool water's mirror-like surface, she saw her own eyes, dark, weary, but steady. The reflection of a woman whose duty was invisible, yet profound. Hayate, equally tired, joked softly once they were in the privacy of their quarters that perhaps someday someone would write songs about their bravery. Megami chuckled once, eyes shining. If they write songs about us, it means we failed, she answered. Best that no one knows we were ever there by sunrise. Clattering noises began in the kitchens as day servants lit fires, stirred rice pots, and polished serving trays. As the house awakened to the scent of miso soup and crisp pickled radish, the night watch tucked themselves into narrow futons in cool rooms with no windows. They would sleep until midday, only to rise and begin preparation once more as afternoon slid toward evening. Such was their rhythm, a life not marked by feasts or battles, but by breath held in corridors and secrets kept in the dark. And so the cycle continued. Night after night, season after season, servants like Megumi, Hayate, Tomo, and Hisashi kept their quiet vigil. They were the unnamed guardians of tranquility, standing not upon stages of history, but buried in its footnotes, like delicate threads, weaving through kimono silk, unseen to admirers, yet essential to its strength and beauty. In the tale of the samurai, it was easy to admire gleaming blades and heroic deeds, but behind that noble facade stood the humble watchers in the shadows. Its greatest victory was the silence of an uneventful night. Their footsteps left no mark. Their candles burned briefly, then vanished, yet their legacy was all around in the peaceful sleep of children, in the trust of their lords, and in the morning dew that glimmered softly on stone, undisturbed, precisely because through the long hours of darkness, someone had been watching. Thank you for resting here a while, for stepping into the quiet world of soot-darkened pots, morning fires, and the quiet care of a cook who stirred more than just soup. If your eyes feel heavier now, it's only the calm weight of time wrapping gently around you. May your night be as steady and comforting as the rhythm of a spoon on iron, soft and unhurried. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're warmly welcome to subscribe only. If it feels right, and if you're still awake, feel free to whisper where you're listening from, or just say goodnight below. For now, sleep well, and let the past keep you company a little longer.